Good afternoon. I'm going to continue with my series on the 1990 World Championship between the reigning champion Garry Kasparov and the challenger Anatoly Karpov. Kasparov won game 20. It's a 24-game match. He's 2 points ahead. Things are becoming fairly desperate for Anatoly Karpov. Game 21 and Game 22 were draws, which leaves Kasparov just needing a half point from the last two games. This is Game 23, the penultimate game, and Karpov has the white pieces. D4, Knight F6, C4, G6. The King's Indian defence, a favourite for Kasparov and a weapon which was really scary to most opponents, for him, really difficult to deal with. He often won. It was one of the ways in which he most often got wins with the black pieces, was by playing the King's Indian defence. He was expert at it. So, yeah. C3, normal developing move. Bishop to G7. This is part of the point of the King's Indian defence. In the King's Indian defence, you let your opponent get black lets white get a large centre and looks to attack it later on and looks to exploit the powerful position of this fianchettoed bishop. And often an idea is to get castled, move this knight all the way and play f5 to attack the large centre which white has established, preferably to establish a pawn duo near to the opponent's king for attacking purposes. So pawn comes c4. Knight d6 to release the bishop, and f3, the sameish variation. This is a very solid and difficult to break down. Sometimes the King's Indian can lead to fairly sudden attacks by black, and this makes sure that there's no sudden attacks going to happen at this point in time. So e5, oh no, castles first, sorry. Bishop t3 and then e5. Yeah, it's recommended that black plays either c5 or e5 at an early opportunity to try and contest this large centre which has been created. Pawn comes to d5 and the knight comes to h5, ready to play f5, but it might just be a bit too early here. Queen comes to d2, ready to challenge the bishop here with bishop to h6, trying to get rid of the powerful fianchettoed bishop, and also preparing queenside castling. Black plays the check. It might have been good just to play rook to e1, rook to e8, so that if the bishop was challenged, you could play bishop to h8 and retain the bishop. Another possible idea would be to play knight to a6, a common move in the King's Indian defence, to maybe play c6 or c5 and knight to c7. But queen to h4 check is a book move, as is the response g3. You might think, why doesn't he play knight takes? Because he can't take with a pawn because he'll lose the rook. But if he plays knight takes, then the bishop just comes to f2 and the knight is pinned to the queen. You could then maybe think about playing pawn takes here. Knight takes pawn to threaten the queen, but then Karpov would just take the queen. When the queen is taken by the knight, he would take the knight, and that way be a piece up. Alright, he would have lost a couple of pawns for it, but yeah, it's not worth it. So he doesn't go for that, he just retreats the queen. Which means that bishop to h6 to try and swap off the bishop is possible for black now. for white now, but he castles queenside first. He thinks this is more important, and that gives him the opportunity to play pawn to g5. It's taken, and the pawn duo is created. There might have been an argument for taking for once with the rook, so that when the bishop came to h6, you still had that opportunity to play bishop to h8, keeping the bishop. But he's not after winning the bishop anyway. He develops his knight, and the knight has developed a6, as I mentioned before. It's a common theme in the King's Indian defence. The rook comes to g1. He might look at playing the pawn here, and opening up the g file before attacking the bishop with the bishop to h6. So knight comes to f6, and knight comes to f2, where it has influence over the e4 square. King comes to h8, and the bishop comes to c2. So white is now finished with his development. Karpov has developed his last pieces. The rooks see one another. I personally would guess that this is a bit better for white. Yeah. Have a guess yourself what the engine says before I look at another guess. Switch off put the video on pause if you need to. I'm going to guess it's about plus 0.7 to white. Sorry, I meant to analyse it. It's 0.89 to white, so not bad. What's the advantage? Well, this knight isn't very well placed. This pawn gives more space, and the g file is open. Even though the king's moved off the g file, it still leaves him a little bit exposed to attack. So that's where the advantage lies. So to get rid of the analysis, bishop comes to g5, and the knight comes to c5. Wants to get back in the game some way. So the structure is quite good for black, so white decides he wants to break it up. And of course, if he does break up, the knight can take the bishop, and then the pawn can take, and eventually the rook can take. So the pawn comes to e5, so there's a lot of swaps to think about. The knight covers d4, and the knight covers d4. You might think, yeah, but the knight's pinned. No, because if you take the queen, then the queen is taken. But then if you take the queen and queen is taken, white has a continuation capture on f8, which nets him the exchange. So, yeah, it's not going to work, but he can still swap off with the pawn and maybe swap off with this knight here. So the pawn takes, and the pawn takes, and the bishop comes to e3 to threaten the knight on c5, to then make it more advantageous to capture on e4. Knight comes to a4, where it's covered by the bishop, threatening the knight, which is one of the pieces threatening the pawn. The knight is threatened, but he takes here first, like an in-betweener, because if he takes the knight, then not taking the rook, but Kasparov would then play knight takes, bishop, check, forcing the recapture, and then he can play with the bishop, and then the bishop pair's gone, and alright, his king's still a bit open, but he's got an extra pawn for his troubles. So he doesn't go for that, he takes on c8, and the knight comes to g8. Yeah. The knight comes to g4, looking at this square and this square. Pawn comes to c5, trying to grab a bit more space on the queen side. Taking on, pass on, triple pawns, but it isn't really a problem for Karpov here. Bishop takes, and you can see that white is really got a black hemmed in. You know that he doesn't have much activity here in this position. He supports the pawn, and he might think at some point in time about playing h4, h5, and h6. Pawn comes 3-5, taken immediately. He doesn't hesitate, and he takes back with the bishop. Kasparov, he's trying to drum up an attack here, but yeah, well, the resources for an attack don't exist. Rook comes to c8, so he's threatening to take either with the bishop or the rook. Take with the bishop, threatening a discovered check, or take with the rook saying check and threatening the bishop here. He offers a queen swap, and the rook comes c3 check, and the king goes to b1. Queen comes to f7, threatening the pawn here, getting out of the way of the swap, but it's too late now because he plays bishop here, and if he takes with the bishop, then he takes with the queen, says check, and the only way to defend the rook is to put the queen in the way, and then he plays queen takes queen, and he's just a piece up. And yeah, nothing more to play for, so Kasparov resigns. 1 game to go, but the 24th game was a draw, meaning that Kasparov won the match 12.5, 11.5. This was Kasparov's last participation in the undisputed World Chess Championship. He did after Karpov and Short started their own professional chess association. Then Karpov did participate in the World Championship then, but as undisputed World Champion, this was his last chance. So I think, it's an appropriate point to say a little bit about Anatoly Karpov as a chess player and his contribution to the game, etc. A fantastic chess player. Not maybe the most creative, not many huge contributions to theory, but I think because of the way that he won the World Chess Championship after Fischer refused to defend his title, I think Fischer really was terrified of losing. Not specifically to Anatoly Karpov, but in general, he didn't. He was happy to have been the American who had won the World Chess Championship. He didn't at any point in time wish to be the American who had lost the World Chess Championship. And I think that became overwhelming for him. Anyway, Karpov I wanted to talk about. So the circumstances in which Karpov became world champion in 1975 were a bit, questionable. I remember, there was a lot of will he, won't he play talk about Fischer and the 1975 World Chess Championship, and I remember when I started school that morning, one of the other lads in the chess team came to me and said, "We've got a new World Chess Champion." I said, "Who is it then?" He said, "It's Anatoly Karpov." I said, "I think he's called Karpov." "Oh, no, we'll call him Karpov." So, yeah, and that was how I found out. Somebody just said at school that, I think he'd heard it on the radio that he wasn't participating. So after his strange ascent to the top in chess, Karpov really decided that he wanted to go out and prove to the world that he was a great chess player, that he was the best chess player in the world, and he just played in so many tournaments and dominated and won, and just fantastic achievements as a player. He defended his title brilliantly against Korchnoi, and yeah, he did lose his title in the end to Kasparov, but all the matches that they played between one another from 1985 until 1990, the difference in won games between the two was 2 games. They played a great deal of draws, and I think Karpov got far better results against Kasparov in his prime than anybody else did. Those two were by a long way the best in the world. Karpov had a real kind of boa constrictor style. It's often been said of Anatoly Karpov that you play against Karpov, 60 move, nothing happens, and then Karpov wins, and that's it didn't produce or go in for the spectacular. Solid, steady, slight improvements. A real kind of his play, his style was a real throwback to Steinitz, just much better with much more modern theory. Just a fantastic chess player, Anatoly Karpov. Him, Anand, Fischer, Carlsen, Kasparov, undoubtedly the best five who have ever played the game. Undoubtedly. Closely followed by the great Jose Raul Capablanca. That's my feeling about their relative strengths, and it's just a good opportunity to recognise the fantastic things done in chess by Anatoly Karpov. Yeah, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe on my videos. Thanks. Bye.